Now, I mentioned the American forces, the 82nd and the 101st, and the British forces. There was also a Polish parachute brigade that was coming in on this attack as well. And they were scheduled to come in a little bit later as reinforcements. And here we go, back to the book. Only then did I remember that the glider-borne part of the Polish parachute brigade was due to land that afternoon upon the stretch of open country below us, at the same time as the parachute battalions were dropped in the Polderland south of Arnhem Bridges. The landing zone was already a battlefield, and the wretched Poles were about to land in the middle of it. First, the gliders hit the ground, its massive weight tearing up chunks of stubble as it skidded to a halt, lurching onto one wing as it did so. Men jumped out and rushed to the rear to release the tail unit so that the vehicles inside could be driven out. Two more gliders were now plowing across the ground. Another exploded in the air in a vast ball of yellow flame just as it was upon the point of touching down. Mortar bombs were bursting among the men struggling to release their loads, while streams of tracer bisected the scene into oddly formal patterns. Another glider was on fire on the ground as still more swooped in to land, adding to the chaos. The Poles were now joining in the battle themselves, some firing toward the Germans, some towards the KOSB, which is the King's Own Scottish Borders. It's another British unit. And some in the direction of our other battalion. It must be impossible for the Poles to distinguish enemy from friend. They probably thought they had landed in a circle of Boche units, all intent upon their destruction. In a few minutes, it was all over. From the wrecked and flaming gliders which now littered the ground, small parties of Poles were making their escape, firing at anything they saw move. 2 or 3 vehicles had been driven away, but otherwise they had failed to drag their jeeps and guns from the gliders. The Polish anti-tank battery no longer existed as a fighting unit. It had landed in the middle of a battle and been destroyed before it could fire a single shot. Waste. It was waste once again. Waste like the supply drop. Nothing seemed to go right. A knot of some 8 Poles charged towards us, intent on seeking shelter either in the woods or behind the safety of a railway embankment. Some 30 yards away, one man slightly ahead of the others must have noticed our camouflage steel helmets in the slit trenches ahead and shouted a warning. In a bunch, they flung themselves into the undergrowth. Anticipating what would happen, I yelled to everyone to get their heads down just as a hail of bullets from the Poles whistled over our heads, a few hitting the trench parapets but most striking the trees well above our heads as the excited men emptied their weapons in our direction. So long as we kept our heads down, we were safe from the Polish fire, but the worry was that some of them might creep closer and start to fling grenades around. However, in a couple of minutes the firing slackened and then ceased. Possibly the Poles sensed that something might be wrong when no one retaliated. The comparative silence provided the opportunity to shout a warning across the narrow stretch of ground which separated us. There was no reply, and I shouted once again. In faltering English, a voice inquired who we were. Firmly, the company sergeant major, Huggins, told them. The Poles seemed to understand. After a few seconds of audible consultation, they rose to their feet and walked across. So you got just a chaotic situation. The Poles land, they're getting attacked from all directions, and sure enough, they're shooting at the friendly forces, blue on blue, happening. Once he gets them settled down, he's got some people, some of these Polish folks that now have no leadership. Back to the book. Calling Douglas over, I told him that he now had a 4th section and 7 platoon. And within a few minutes, the Poles were digging hard under the tutelage of their corporal, the only comprehensible part of whose name sounded like Peter.